Canadian Grand Prix felt very, very familiar to me. We've seen Mercedes at the front, and also the usual suspect kicking off. But honestly, I think they're as bad as each other. Even though this is a very major result for the team, and a sign that the W15 does have that potential, which did show itself in Canada like I predicted, the overall picture isn't quite as rosy. Sure, the team bagging 28 points in one race is now much more like the Mercedes of old, but you've really got to take a look at the bigger picture and realise that it really could have been more had the two drivers that they have on hand done that little bit better. I still can't get out of my head what Toto said on the radio, and that really creepily, eerily arousing sounding, "You're on pole, George." Yes, George Russell getting that pole, the second of his career, was a huge tour de force and a huge contrast in what we just saw a few races ago. But we've still seen the situation where Lewis just can't quite do it in Q3. All of this means Lewis has to try harder to try and get back towards better results. Had he qualified higher by his own admission, he would have been in mix for the podium, probably almost as good as Russell. And then you got to look at George. Even though that Saturday was fantastic, Mr. Saturday returns, the race itself though, this was George's race to lose, and he lost it. I do respect George, and I do think he has talent for the future in being the Mercedes team leader, but it's not there yet. He made quite a few errors, which cost him the lead and allowed Max Verstappen to get some breathing space, especially toward the end, and then he couldn't even hold on to second. He will get better, Russell, but it's a clear indicator that he isn't quite there yet when dealing with front-end pressure, like Lando was lacking it, say, 18 months ago. He does lack in that department, but if he can continue to get that experience with that car now seemingly up there, and maybe at some tracks we get 4 teams in the mix for the win, it could come to him, and maybe by 2025 he might be a little bit more composed where he doesn't make those mistakes, but in truth he's making them right now, and that cost him the win and cost him second place. But that being said, I'm glad that that car has now sorted itself out, and it is pretty quick on the hard tyres, admittedly. If the W15 can be just as good in Spain, then we might see Mercedes really back on its feet. But as for Lewis, whilst he got the best result of the year for himself, and the fastest lap, he still views it as one of the worst races of his career. He did make mistakes of his own, and he was also limited in terms of his tyre choices. Maybe he might have been able to try and go for the soft tyre option when the car was lighter, and he truly might have been able to hold on to third place and maybe even challenge Lando for second. But alas, that was not available to him, the team didn't make that choice, and therefore he had to make do with the medium, whilst still quick, and almost got him third place, and it did get him the fastest lap. It wasn't quite enough to keep George behind him, and now there's clearly no team orders to back Lewis up. It was not going to be a case of telling George to hold position and don't take any risks. No, they were allowed to race one another, and George did come out on top when compared to both of them. The drivers themselves still need to improve things and really get their heads back in gear. George needs more front-end experience, and Lewis really needs to sort himself out in qualifying. If they can do that though, and especially if Lewis can get over his qualifying gremlins, maybe by Silverstone, I could easily see him at the British Grand Prix on the podium. But with McLaren, you get the sense from Lando that that car is a car that can push Max throughout the entire season. And also what really filled me with hope is that Lando is being far more pragmatic, not nearly as sad or denigrating to himself as he has been for quite a few years now. Yes, of course, he was frustrated and annoyed that he didn't win the race when it looked like at one moment he could have easily done it, and by a convincing margin on intermediate tyres. He was like, shoot, it was mine, but oh well, swings and roundabouts and all that. And that is a really marked improvement in terms of his overall demeanour. He probably knows that this car, the McLaren, is an absolute beast. Even he's able to admit that, yeah, the safety car helped me in Miami, but it went against me here. That's what happens in F1, which is the case. Max wasn't robbed in Miami, nor was Lando robbed here. Yes, the RB20 will come back swinging later in the year with its own upgrades, but for now, the McLaren is the most consistent, especially when you see how Ferrari completely fell off this weekend. So you know what, maybe for McLaren, second place in the Constructors is now doable. They gained a huge amount of points over Ferrari this time out. I think we can safely say that McLaren's dark days are well and truly over. As for Oscar though, he's still got a ways to go. He's still got to work on his tyre management, as the end race pace of the Mercedes was simply too much for him to keep Lewis and George behind, whereas Lando was in the mix. It will come to him, and he is doing well enough to ensure McLaren is a threat to the team title somewhat. But if both Ferraris kick on and both of their drivers are next to each other, where there is a notable gap between Norris and Oscar at the moment, it might mean that that's just not possible and Ferrari will be able to speed away from them again. But for the moment, McLaren are looking really, really good here, and the Canadian Grand Prix, this was the first time they've even scored in Canada for a decade. So even that, getting a second and a fifth, that's still miles better than what they've seen in recent years. This is definitely a win. And fair play to Max. He had to fight for that one and made the most of George, Lando and Oscar fighting each other for second to be able to scamper off after the safety cars. I'm perfectly okay with Max Verstappen winning races over the course of this season, but if they're really, really close fought ones and he has to really go tooth and nail to get that win, it makes it all the more rewarding and satisfying for us viewers. And even he says so, that this was a rewarding victory that did not come to him easily. He still had that curb issue. That's not going to go away for the course of the season. They've got to try and find the team ways to limit the issue when it comes to curbs. Some circuits, curbs don't really matter so much. Others, they do. But the fact of the matter is, though, put Max Verstappen in that car, he will find ways to make the most out of whatever he's given. And then, of course, if there are circumstances that benefit him, he will capitalize on it. Like I said in my predictions video, if he gets out ahead and is able to dictate the race pace, he will do so. And he did that. Races like this remind us that sometimes the driver can make all the difference, that despite the curb issue, he kept it together and remained ahead of everyone. Well done, Max. And then, come on, after the last few races, I think Aston Martin are winners here. Yes, 6th and 7th, it's not exactly what Papa Stroll probably expected, especially at the home race of theirs. But truth be told, this is exactly what they needed after them not scoring anything or barely anything in the last couple of months. But the thing that really tarnished it all is what Lance Stroll was saying in all of his press releases, saying that, yeah, I'm 4-4 qualifying with Fernando, just take it as you will. Oh, Lance, this is why people don't like you. This is just arrogant. Oh, you're not a team player. Oh, you're not a team player at all. But either way, they got 6th and 7th, fair enough. Lance did good. And admittedly, when you look back at his performances at the Canadian Grand Prix, he is quite good. And let's be fair here, Fernando is also being cheeky, saying, oh, we're in a good place. We're in front of Ferraris and a Red Bull. Yeah, he was being cheeky. But Fernando, he's endearing like that, whereas Lance just isn't. And then we had Pirelli giving this really bizarre op-ed on Lance and why he was so great. And they got fact-checked on Twitter. 3 wins? No, sorry, no amount of jet lag would make you get that wrong. For the team though, not bad. But they really need to bring their A game. And they also need to understand that 5th place in the Constructors this year, that's the best they're going to get. They are not going to get 4th. Mercedes, no, they've clocked off now. And of course, they really needed to bring their A game for this Grand Prix. Otherwise, a lot of the personnel, including Mike Cragg, would have ended up in the St. Papa Stroll River. Then there's Daniel. There you go. You got another race to point to aside from Miami sprint race. On the whole, even though he got a jump start, Ricciardo looked like the better driver over the course of the weekend. And yeah, that jump start, that was strange. I looked at the video and you could barely tell it was a jump start. It was certainly far less egregious than Lando's jump start was, where he didn't get penalised and Ricciardo did. I'm glad that they're starting to get a handle on it, but still, 5 seconds for that. That probably cost Daniel 7th place and allowed Stroll that position, because that was within 5 seconds, the gap between Stroll and Ricciardo. But 8th place, 4 points, that's exactly what Daniel needed, especially when Jacques Villeneuve was let loose on Sky Sports TV, then realising, oh no, Jacques is too powerful with his hot takes, contain him! Although admittedly, he was actually quite good, interesting, he really mixed things up. But Daniel came back from it, not only in the media pen, but also on the track. He got 5th place in qualifying and 8th in the race. That's not too shabby. And also, it's a nice boost of morale as well for the fact that Yuki is the first driver to be locked in at that team for 2025. Daniel's still got a ways to go to get that to happen, but I do think that Christian Horner will protect him, as many people view it as, and then Liam Lawson will be left without a seat. But right now, this is exactly what Daniel needed to do, to get some more points and help try and limit the damage to the battle for 5th place in the Constructors, because, you know, Aston Martin scored 10 more points than they did. So at least now he was able to give the team something after Yuki Tsunoda's spin toward the end of the race. And then considering that Pierre got sideswiped by Checo at the start, to get back up into the points isn't a bad showing. And the early gamble on the hards was the move that sent the rest of the grid toward dry tyres, meaning that, hey, the Alpine strategists were onto something. They got something right this year. And what brings Pierre to the winner's circle here is that throughout all of the kerfuffle between Ocon and Alpine that I'll get to later, because trust me, I want to, Gasly was sitting pretty, and he then ended up in P9 and therefore helping out and also getting ahead of Ocon in the driver's standings, which will mean a lot to him and anger Esteban to the extreme. But does it really matter though? Because as far as we're concerned, well, no, the battle's over. Pierre has won. He's going to be there for next year. He has an option to stay, and he probably will stay since he likes working for a works team. It's clear that Pierre is now in the hot seat. He's being the team player that Alpine needs and wants, whereas Esteban, it's all over the place at the moment. But in truth, both Alpine drivers really put on a decent showing and some sign of potential in Alpine that, hey, maybe they have reached the lowest ebb and have now started to get themselves back on their feet, since they're now getting closer to 7th place. Then we get to the meh section and oh dear, Haas, I fought every fibre of my being to keep them out of the loser bracket because that opening stint, my goodness, that was godly! Haas were looking like, to quote their old boss, rock stars. Seriously, those first 10 laps were absolutely mesmeric. Watching Kevin and Nico climbing up from 14th and 15th to 4th and 8th was crazy. They, at first, were looking like they made the wrong call going on wets. They were the only team to do so, and it proved to be the absolute best decision. You think, okay, Kevin going up to 4th place, yeah, he won't be able to stay there for much longer, and the intermediates were suddenly coming back to the other drivers, but surely, yeah, you go into the pit stop, yeah, you might be at the bottom end of the points, but you might be on for points, but then no! Haas blew it. Over the course of those 2 pit stops of Kevin's, he probably lost up to 10 seconds alone from that, and that could have easily put him in contention for a point or two, denying Alpine. I feel for Kevin, I really do. Seriously, after all of the negative headlines that Kevin has had in the past month or so, and him being on the cusp of a race ban, which will probably never come because the FIA right now are being too chicken about it, like they were with Gasly last year. He was so close to a race ban, but he never got it. This was something that he really, really needed. So Kevin, you did really good this time out and you made the most of it, and you can tell he was frustrated. Nico was frustrated as well, especially since he was only half a second off of the 2 Alpines. That in of itself would have been a nice little salvo after what they've been able to do. At one point, 4th and 8th. If that had worked as intended, that would have been one of the most impressive efforts that I'd ever seen from Haas. Pulling off such a strategy, getting the pit stops right, and then being able to hold position and get a double points finish. That would have been absolutely bonkers, and that would have made the Canadian Grand Prix even better. You look at that first stop, Kevin was there, but the pit crew weren't. He just came in and then they weren't ready. Surely they would have been ready, but I suppose it's now down to the fact that at the Canadian Grand Prix, Haas are the first pit stop, whereas usually they're the last. It's inverted for some reason. I don't know why. If people do know why that's the case, do leave it in the comments because I'm curious. And also, with Racing Bulls scoring more points, 6th place is looking less likely now, and now you've got Alpine right on their tail, and Williams will probably catch up again, so Haas have really got to kick on now. They got some points at the beginning of the season, and they're now dropping points. I just want to take a short pause before we get to the losers to thank people who have signed up on the Patreon over the last couple of weeks. It's been insane the amount of support, so thank you so much. And based on what you see right here, we're going to need a bigger board. If you want to join these people and get yourself a lanyard as well from me, link below. But Ferrari, my goodness, wow! This drop-off made no sense whatsoever. However, this feels not all that dissimilar to the problems that Leclerc had in Suzuka, where extra tyres had to be used to get into Q3. Only this time, there was no rubber in which to use, or that they were willing to use, and it just felt completely confusing. Yes, Fred Vasseur tried to explain away the situation, but in truth, no matter what the conditions were, Ferrari were just not there. Leclerc was stumped. It was just slow. He said on the radio, "We are just unbelievably slow." But then it started to become that little bit clearer in the race when we realised that he was also nursing an engine issue, which resulted in him losing 80 horsepower down the straights especially, half a second a lap, which he had to extract like blood out of a stone from his race engineer, who was trying to dance around the question to the point when Charles was just tell me, stop beating about the bush, and then said half a second. Half a second That's pretty big, especially with the margins being so short right these days. And as for Carlos, well, he wasn't much better either, and then that spin. Oh, that's the worst spin. As a person who's dabbled in sim racing, having those spins where the car's just rumbling around so much, and it's not as elegant or as agile as a typical F1 car, that's just rough. He took out Albon, and he was like, oops, sorry about that, you guys. This was a really bad weekend for Ferrari, but hey, maybe they got all of their bad situations in one weekend and they can maybe rebound for Spain, because otherwise they have to, or else they're seriously going to have to worry about McLaren for second place in the Constructors, let alone try and go for Red Bull. And as for Yuki, oh dear, this was not a good weekend for him, was it? And I'm not just talking about his overall performance and his okay qualifying where he did get into Q3, but the things around it were not all that good. And it was all punctuated by the idea of Racing Bulls not properly telling him when to get to the grid for the National Anthem presentation, and he got fined €10,000. Okay, he won't be fined, but the team will be fined. They just completely dropped the ball on that front. And then he got caught out of that corner, which admittedly caught out a lot of people because it got incredibly waterlogged. The moment you get on it, you're done. And then to top it all off, yes, you might be thinking this is good news, that Yuki's going to be in F1 for next year, that his seat is secure. But you got to take a look at the bigger picture here and what Red Bull just did. They've locked him in. It's effectively a prison sentence. He can now no longer talk to other teams and try and get himself ready for when 2026 comes around. Because you've got to be realistic here. You got to realize that, hey, his destiny has been taken away from him. The option to stay for 2025 is Red Bull's one to take, not Yuki's. This wasn't his choice. They decided to keep him. And yeah, he is doing a very good job at Racing Bulls, and he's giving that team a lot of things to be happy about, especially this year, the best start to a season he's ever had, but his autonomy has been taken away. He can now not try and go for Alpine or maybe Audi, because all of those seats will have been taken. And who knows what might happen for 2026? There might not be anywhere else for Yuki to go. And that might leave him without a drive. He's really got to kick on from this year and be even better, because otherwise, he'll be done. And that'll be a crying shame. But then again, let's remember here, he's contracted for the Red Bull group, not just Racing Bulls. Things could change, but I don't see it right now. Alpine! This is a very complicated situation, because you think it's all Ocon's fault, but when you actually look at it, they were as bad as each other. And we've got 15 more races of this. Yes, Alpine did ask for something sort of ridiculous right after Ocon lost out on 8th place to allow Gasly a go at Ricciardo with only 3 laps to go. But the way that Esteban handled it was not particularly full of team spirit. Him basically telling the team to forget it. And then he spent the end of the race being incredibly sarcastic, saying, wow, way to go guys, great team effort, I did my part, you didn't, oh, I was being too nice, I shouldn't have been a nice guy. It's like, stop Esteban, I know you're annoyed, but this is not a good look, especially since now the media is not afraid to call you out on it. So he's going to be scrutinised more than any other driver. And him getting a chance to be at another team for next year, that's going to be brought into scrutiny as well, because do you really want a driver who's going to be argumentative and then be sarky on the radio? No, you don't. But okay, you got to step back and look at the bigger picture here. Alpine asking him to do that with only 3 laps to go, that was going to be a bold effort. And Pierre trying to do it, that would have been a pretty tough challenge, but they thought it could have worked. But then with Ocon stalling for a lap, it reduced the amount of time that it could have been done, and then it wasn't done, and then Alpine reneged on their usual deal when they ask a driver to swap positions and then they get it back if it doesn't work out. That's just going to make things even worse. So right now, that relationship between the team and the driver, it's broken. It's broken down. It's irreparable. And I don't think Alpine cares right now. They want to get Jack Doohan in the car, especially since the fact that he got washed out on Friday, so we didn't really get a chance to see him in that car. But I bet you we will see Jack in that car in FP1 in a couple of races' time, taking Ocon's seat as well, and pretty much throughout the rest of the season, I bet. Either way, I just feel like that relationship is broken down to the point where it's just going to look laughable and unprofessional and just sad. Ocon railing against the system, Alpine giving him very questionable decisions. I don't blame Ocon entirely, but I don't blame Alpine entirely either. They're as bad as each other. Whereas, as I said earlier, Gasly, he's just kicking back. He's won. He's just like looking at a guy, where's the popcorn? And I get it, yes, they more than doubled their points tally and are close to Haas, but that messing about with letting Gasly through nearly allowed Hülkenberg to swoop in as he finished half a second behind Ocon. And we've got 6 more months of this. Then there's Williams. Oh, that hurt! That hurt a lot. The team looked genuinely good this weekend. Not only did Albon look set to score some more points again, after having gotten into Q3, but even Logan looked impressive. If Logan had just been a tenth of a second faster in Q2, he might have gotten into Q3 and out-qualified both Ferraris. And that's crazy. However, all that Williams came away with were both of their cars causing safety cars. Sargent simply running out of talent in the slippery conditions, having probably realised that his career in F1's already over, and Albon, him doing the best he could to avoid Carlos Sainz. He almost had it, but then he got tagged at the back, caused too much damage, he was out, he probably would have gotten P9 instead of one of the Alpines. It was just sad. The FW46 did have some upgrades for this weekend, and they genuinely added some pace, with Alex pointing out that the car felt good on all compounds. If it's the case that Carlos Sainz is going to be going to Williams for next year, as is dictated with James Vowles gushing about it all over the time and Carlos being ultra defensive about it, this was not the way to ingratiate yourself with your brand new team by taking out their lead driver. Oops. I get it, James, you can't contain yourself and are gushing about Sainz whenever you can, but stop! Logan's right there! Get a room! And then Perez. Oh boy, you want to know what the kicker is out of all this? Is that Perez has got a 3-place grid penalty, through no fault of his own. Red Bull told Checo to drive the car back to the pits to avoid a safety car for Max, which he did, but it cost the team €25,000 and whacked Perez with a 3-place grid penalty for the Spanish Grand Prix. He followed team orders and he got penalised for it. Just goes to show how much they're treating Checo right now. This is absolutely insane. They should have probably just told him to stop the car, because they had to pay for it, and now Checo, he's got even less of a chance to try and make up for it at Spain. Simply put, the timing of all this couldn't have been worse, even maybe worse than what Esteban did this weekend. And then you got to look back at the language of what Christian Horner had been saying. The clarification of his 2-year extension, that sure enough, I knew it, it's a 1+1 jobby, because in the original press release, Christian never said anything about 2026, he only said 2025. I'm not begrudging Checo at all for him remaining at Red Bull. He pulled a blinder of a deal, and whatever happens next is squarely on Horner's shoulders. Maybe Christian's realised this, that maybe he might have made a mistake, and that maybe he's now sort of walking back the 2026 talk and thinking about next year and what might happen then. Because now he's mentioning that, oh, we've still got Yuki, you know. He's now being a bit more open as to what Tsunoda can offer the team. Him actually being quite dismissive of Yuki over the past couple of months. And you just get the feeling now that maybe the choice of keeping Checo internally was not the most popular decision. And even though Helmut Marko has vowed to keep the peace and go along with Horner's opinions, he's still not doing that, because now he's saying, oh, Checo's problems are psychological rather than to do with the car. It's just last year all over again. Are we going to see Marko bashing Checo again? And that's just going to make him feel even worse, and then it's just going to make Christian Horner's decision to keep him around even more dubious and questionable. That team, man, they just don't know how to handle themselves. Marko's promised to try and toe the line, but he can't do that. And then Christian makes these decisions. Again, this is not Checo's fault. He's managed to pull a really good deal out of the bag. This is again on Christian. He's the team principal. He made the call to keep Checo, to keep Max happy, and then keep everyone else happy, and also make a lot of money. And then probably not many people are happy about this now. Because you look at it, a Q1 exit, again, and only 4 points scored in 3 races, and Piastri is catching up to him bit by bit. And even though the Ferraris failed to score themselves, Lando's pulled away in the standings to potentially being second place. Unless Checo pulls something out of the bag and really gets himself away from 2023 and has a great rest of the year, people are going to be questioning Christian Horner's decision all the more. And that option for 2026 might not be taken, because that language has suddenly changed within the space of a week. But again, Checo, well done to your team and management for getting that deal. Because whatever happens, it's on Christian's head. And you can find out why I think this in this video here that you can go and watch right now, that no matter what happens, Checo is the ultimate victor of the Red Bull deal.